Welcome back to Sociology 1. Today we're going to be talking about games, goods, and self-interest. Let's begin with a review. So far we have covered a couple of causes of behavior. Those are meaning and culture and authority. So right now you have learned that we would predict that there is social order when individuals share common meanings. We've talked a little bit about authority and the idea that we would predict that there is social order when rules exist, rules are enforced, people are monitored, and the authority figure is viewed as legitimate. Those factors, shared meanings, legitimacy, rules, enforcement, they're going to shape people's internal states, their motives. It's going to make them either motivated by habit, emotion, values. Today we're going to talk about self-interest. Based on those internal states, we're going to see certain behaviors rather than other behaviors. And finally we'll end with the outcome, social order, cooperation, coordination. One of my students in another section said, "Mike, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be learning right now." And basically the idea is, if I present you with a situation, you begin to ask questions, but you're going to ask good sociological questions. So let's say you've got a situation in a family where people are not cooperating and coordinating. One of the first questions you would ask is, do they have shared meanings? You'd look at things like, do they have shared meanings of family? Do they have shared meanings of whatever is relevant to that particular case? What about authority? You'd ask questions about authority because you're a good sociologist. You'd say to the parents, well, what rules do you have governing this thing that's a problem? Let's say the children don't want to go to bed on time. What rules do you have established? How do you enforce those rules? You'd ask questions about that and probe. How are you monitoring? Do your children view you as a legitimate authority? Now, of course, a sociologist who's, doing their work is not going to use big words like, do your children see you as a legitimate authority? You find indirect ways of sort of asking about those issues and researching those issues. Sociologists don't. When we talk to normal people, we don't say, how do you monitor your children? We say simpler things like, how do you keep an eye on them? How do you make sure they do, what they're supposed to do? But anyway, the idea here is that any situation you're presented with, a good sociologist knows good questions to ask, and I just offered a couple examples. Do they have shared meanings? Are there rules? How do your children view your rules? Do they view them as fair? Do they view them as consistent? Things like that. So these are questions that sociologists would ask. Sociologists would also look at their internal states and motives and try to figure out, are the children being motivated by habit? Maybe they're not, and they should be. Are the children being motivated by emotion? And maybe they shouldn't be. How do you change that? So, again, the sociologist is going to ask lots of questions. They're going to ask about what behaviors they're seeing. And a sociologist, again, would think backwards. Based on these behaviors, I think the person's being motivated by emotion. Well, emotion's not a very good motivator in this situation because you're getting a behavior you don't like. Let's see if we can motivate your child by habit or by self-interest. So if you understand that, you're in good shape for the course. If you think that I'm speaking Greek, then you and I should have a conversation. Now, if we were doing this in class, I would ask for volunteers. I would select two people, two brave souls, and I would say, please go out of the room. And I'd kick them out of the room. And I would explain the prisoner's dilemma to everybody else in the room. The prisoner's dilemma involves two players who are isolated. The police want the criminals to cooperate with them. The police need the criminals to stop cooperating with each other. You've probably seen this on a show like Law and Order, where they bring two criminals in, they shove them in the interrogation room, and they try to get one criminal to turn against the other. This is called the prisoner's dilemma. It's a very, very common economic game that economists play. And we're going to examine this game. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. So I want to point out here that the two players, otherwise known as criminals, are isolated. So I want you to think about what you currently know about social order. What would you predict? Would criminals be able to cooperate if they were isolated from each other? The answer is no. One of the foundation that we started with for social order, for people to cooperate, is that they must be able to communicate and have shared meanings. The police immediately isolate the two criminals so that stops them from cooperating. Now, on the other hand, you've got police officers who they can gather up as much information as they want. They can share information. They can coordinate so the police can, I can interrogate one prisoner and then go and interrogate another prisoner. I can go tell another detective what I learned through my interrogation. The police have the ability to communicate and have shared meanings as they play this game. But the criminals are not. So right there, are we going to predict that the criminals are going to be able to coordinate and cooperate with each other? No way. They can't communicate. So the game is to get the criminal to cooperate with the police rather than cooperating with each other. You might be saying to yourself, why are we learning about, criminals and police and the prisoner's dilemma? Well, if social order is fundamentally about cooperation, the prisoner's dilemma is about getting people to cooperate with you rather than each other. So it's very relevant to social order. Well, every single game, and the prisoner's dilemma is a game, has an incentive structure. An incentive structure is basically the rewards and punishments for doing different courses of action, because the perspective we're looking at basically argues that in any given social situation, there's many choices an individual can make. So we're going to look at which choices individuals would make and what's motivating them to choose one thing rather than another. So, the first option. If both criminals confess at the same time, the police say to the criminals, you have to confess, tell us, that the other guy did it, we'll let you go home. If they both say at the exact same time, on video recording, yes, we did it, and they both point at each other as the trigger men, the police basically just got two confessions. Both of the criminals get 25 years in prison. Now, the second option. If the first player confesses and the second player keeps his mouth shut, the one that confesses gets to go home, see their wife and kids, go to Disneyland. They're free. They've just cooperated with the police. The second player is not cooperating with the police. Therefore, they go to jail for 15 years. Not as much as if they both confess, but still a fair amount of time. The last option is if neither player confesses. They both keep their mouth shut. But they didn't, they did murder the guy. Don't get me wrong. Both players serve 5 years in prison. So the important question here is, what would you do? In class, as I said, I actually play out the prisoner's dilemma. I pretend to be a police officer. I get two students. I tell them, guys, you killed somebody, and the police are coming after you to say that you did it. I've got you in an interrogation room. What are you going to do? And a lot of my students want to quickly go for, I'm not saying anything. And I remind them that imagine this is a real situation. You've just murdered someone. You're already in the interrogation room. You killed them like 2 days ago. You're in an interrogation room 48 hours later. You're in trouble. What are you going to do? Particularly if you had a partner. And the thing of it is that wouldn't you try to throw the other guy under the bus? And so that you can go home. And I asked them to really, nobody wants to go to prison. What are you gonna do? Inevitably, I get somebody who, says, yeah, throw the other guy under the bus. I'll say he did it. And I'll get another student who says, I'll keep my mouth shut. Well, you tell that student, you just went to jail, you went home free because you confessed, and the other one went to jail for 15 years. And what I do is I actually have the students replay the game over and over and over, and I keep score of who serves more time in prison. And it's a game about who serves less. the winner serves less time in prison. Now, the outcome that's best for the individual, if I'm going to do something and I'm going to, be the happiest, that's not going to prison. I do not want to go to prison. 0 years in prison is my goal. The problem is if I continuously try to tell the cops it's the other guy that did it, well, what's going to happen? The other guy is eventually going to start pointing the finger at me and say, he did it. Suddenly, the police have received 2 confessions. We're both going to jail for 25 years. Ooh, no good, 25 years. We play again. Maybe this time I keep my mouth shut. He says I did it. Oh, I'm going to jail for 15 years. I just kept my mouth shut and now I'm going to jail. So, you play this game over and over and over. And what economists have found is that time matters. Yep, sorry, I got lost in my own presentation. There we go. If you're only going to play the game once, being an asshole and going for the strategy that's the most selfish, trying to get 0 years, is kind of rational. I'm only going to play this game once. I'm only going to murder somebody once in my life, and I'm going to point at the guy who I did it with and send him up the river, and I'm going to stay home. But if you're going to keep on playing this game over and over and over and over and over, eventually there should be learning. And according to rational choice theory, which is what you're learning should take place. If you're continuously doing something stupid, you keep on walking into the wall, banging your head, keep walking into the wall, banging your head, and you don't change what you're doing, you're not learning. You're not thinking. You're just doing the same thing over and over. So the idea here is that if you're playing any game and you're just doing it over and over, you should eventually start changing your strategy and figuring out what's the best strategy to pursue for yourself. Okay? You should reach one that's best for you and your partner. What I have next is a short film clip of The Prisoner's Dilemma from a television show called The Wire. So I'd like you to watch this film clip, and it's written by a journalist. The television show, The Wire, is written by a journalist who spent a year with the homicide detectives in Baltimore. So he's got some street credibility. And he wrote a really, really good television show about homicide and the drug trade in Baltimore. I would definitely recommend checking it out. So if you would click on the screen on the play button and watch this YouTube video of The Wire where they do The Prisoner's Dilemma.